Hello, welcome to the AT&T CyberThreat Report for December 15th, 2011. Today we have Dave Gross joining us, a regular participant in the program. He's a senior incident response analyst and the lead for our malware analysis activities. Welcome, Dave. And what are you planning to discuss today?
Hi, Brian. Today I'm going to discuss two things. One is a denial of service vulnerability that was discovered with Windows phones using SMS, and also an article about Google pulling 22 apps from the Android market because of fraudulent charges coming through those apps.
Okay, that's interesting. You know, we had sort of taken a little time off talking about mobility, vulnerabilities, and that sort of thing, and so the last couple of weeks here we're reintroducing that, and we'll have a good discussion there, I'm sure. We have a new participant here today. Jim Boxmeyer is joining us. He is a lead incident responder on our team, and welcome, Jim. What do you plan to discuss today?
Hey, Brian. Thought we'd talk a little bit about SCADA attack and trending that seems to be coming. I think it's going to be a big thing next year.
Will be too, and look forward to that discussion. We have John Hogoboom, a regular participant. He's a lead security analyst, develops a lot of our analysis tools, certainly a lot of proof of concept work. Welcome, John, and what do you plan to discuss?
Hey, Brian. Today I'm going to go again over the spam type of trends we're seeing and the malware inside them. And we're going to take a deeper dive into a particular sample that's been gaining some traction lately. And it's pretty interesting, and it doesn't actually contain the malware inside. It's a drive-by exploit, so that'll be an interesting one to take a look at.
Yeah, that does sound interesting, and there's always sort of a new twist being introduced, so it's good to keep track of those. Sounds like we have a good thing going here. I'm Brian Rexroad, and I'll cover the internet weather, sort of a regular portion of our program. And I want to remind you that if you have questions, feedback, or suggestions on topics we should cover, please feel free to contact us. You can email us at cyberthreat@list.att.com. So let's move in. Let's talk a little bit more about the mobility stuff. How's that coming along, Dave?
Well, what's been discovered this week is that on Windows phones, a single specially crafted SMS message being sent to the phone can cause the device to reboot, and when the phone comes back up, it disables the messaging hub. So the messaging hub won't come up at all after the reboot. And the only known fix right now is a hard reset and wiping the device. So basically, if you have a Windows mobile phone, you probably want to make sure you have your information backed up on there, just in case you get one of these things. The exploit hasn't been released publicly. Windows is aware of, or Microsoft is aware of it, and they're working on a fix, so hopefully a fix will be coming out soon. And I also want to mention that this can also be triggered by a Facebook chat message or Windows Live Messenger message. It doesn't have to come through SMS. And there's another related vulnerability that they mentioned, saying that if you have a friend that's pinned as a live tile, if the friend has the malicious crafted message on their Facebook page, when that tile goes live, it can lock up the phone. Now, with that one, evidently, if you reboot the phone and you can get in fast enough to take that off of being a live tile, you can regain control of the phone. So that one isn't fatal denial of service like these other ones are. But the other ones, I mean, you can still evidently use the phone to make calls and stuff like that, but the whole messaging hub won't be available unless you wipe and reset and wipe the device.
So I seem to remember reading a little bit about this, and, you know, to me it sounded very reminiscent of, perhaps not the exact mechanism, but certainly in terms of the kind of effect, reminiscent of that vulnerability that Charlie Miller had discovered against iPhone some time back. I mean, it certainly looks like it's really kind of getting down into the OS of the device. Do you agree?
Yes. I mean, different devices, as they've matured, we've found vulnerabilities in them, and, this is no different. Each one is going to have its own manifestations of different kinds of vulnerabilities.
It could be pretty catastrophic if one of the SMS spammers or something took advantage of it and really blasted it out to a lot of people.
That's right. And that's why it's been kept so much under wraps as to what the actual message is. And, Microsoft is working hard on getting it fixed very soon.
So when your phone gets hit with this, only the SMS portion of your phone gets knocked out? You can still do data-type traffic and back up stuff that's on the phone?
I believe so, although it says that the messaging hub doesn't work, which I assume means that you can't do some of the things like Facebook and Windows Live Messenger as well. I'm thinking that those are all tied in together there, but I'm not sure. I don't have a Windows phone, and so I'm not that familiar with the messaging hub. Okay.
So this is sort of another aspect of this that's kind of interesting. I think there was some speculation about whether, this exploit just hasn't matured to the point where you could actually take over control of the device. And that turned out, if you remember correctly, I think this was back perhaps 2009 Black Hat, where Charlie Miller, I could be even wrong by year, it could have been 2008, but where he had planned to demonstrate that you could disable an iPhone with exploit he had discovered, then ultimately was able to demonstrate that he could take over the iPhone. I think perhaps there's a similar concern in this particular situation as well.
It might be. I mean, so far it doesn't sound like they've gotten far enough to realize whether or not they have control over it. At this point, it seems like it just crashes that messaging hub. But I think in the iPhone case, it was demonstrated that there was more potential for control of the phone there.
Just one other sort of final comment. My personal opinion, I am kind of thrilled by the fact that there have been so few exploits that have been identified that really kind of get into the device. There certainly are some, and they need to be fixed. But being relatively new bases of software that are being used in these devices, I would have kind of expected it to be a lot worse than it is. So I don't know if that's a matter of the researchers and the exploiters still developing an understanding of how these systems work and how to take advantage of those, or if it's the fact that the underlying systems are actually a little bit better than we've traditionally dealt with, or perhaps a combination of those two. I don't know. Does anybody else have a thought on that?
Well,
I think it be because they don't really just have the big market share yet, and their researchers are still focused on the people with the majority of the share, which is pretty much why Windows is one of the primary attacked OSs on computers.
Right, and along those lines, Jim, I think a lot of the juicy targets, a lot of what they're looking for are ways of sending out spam and, ways of phishing for financial information and stuff like that. And I think a lot of that is still primarily on PCs.
Oh, good story there, Dave. In fact, it's also encouraging to see that they're handling this correctly. That is not making the exploit public before there's a correction for it. So what else do you have?
Okay. The other thing I had for today was Google pulled 22 apps from the Android market because of fraudulent charges. And what happened here, these are apps that claim to be horoscopes or downloaders for popular games or free versions of the popular games, and in some cases wallpapers that go on your screen there. And what these things do behind the scene is sends SMS messages to premium numbers. In a lot of cases, buried in the terms of service, if you can find the terms of service and if you could dig deep enough into the terms, there's some wording about the fact that there may be premium charges or whatever, but it's not doesn't sound like it's really up front in terms of them presenting this information. This is mostly targeting customers in European countries. They're using SMS short codes, shortened numbers, not full numbers there. And these numbers that they're using will not work in North America. So for these particular apps, the North American market is okay. Before these apps got pulled by Google, Lookout Mobile estimates that 14,000 downloads occurred of these apps, which is a relatively small amount compared to the number of apps that get downloaded overall. And Symantec indicates that this is a relatively low-risk set of apps, and it's easy to remove. It looks like it doesn't really embed itself deeply into the phone or root the phone or anything like that.
So this is an interesting gray space. So what really constitutes it? Many of the cases that we've seen, in particularly in Android, but also in other devices, where we've seen applications that are otherwise legitimate but had some kind of a Trojan built into them. This is one where it's kind of, well, is it really a Trojan? Is it not a Trojan? I think the main thing, and we had a discussion about this, I think this perhaps last week or so, about, the application not portraying itself in terms of what it was actually performing. And so, this is a tricky area, and I think there's always somebody looking for that, that fine line where they can shave between what's allowed and what is really not so good.
Yeah, this is a big concern. It's been going on for a while over in Europe with these premium short SMS codes, and I've heard that may be coming to the U.S. as well, which would bring the same problem over here. I'm surprised you haven't seen it in some of the other OSs as well, honestly. The Apple Store doesn't really look at what the thing does from a content perspective. So I would expect this is going to be a problem that's ongoing and continues to grow because it's low-hanging fruit for them to make a profit.
Although we haven't seen this kind of thing show up so much in the iPhone. It's been more, or at least feels like it's been more directed in the Android market. And there was one that was actually targeting, I think, U.S. users some time ago, GG Tracker, that was very similar to this one.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll expect to see more of this going forward. And, I think perhaps there'll be some refinements of what the policy is and what constitutes, portraying an application properly.
Right.
Good. So thank you for that, Dave. And so at this point, I guess what we'll do is move over to a discussion with Jim here. And, control systems, we depend on those for a variety of things. What do you think is going to happen here?
Well, I don't think people realize how pervasive SCADA systems are. They range from everywhere from controlling nuclear plants, chemical manufacturing plants, refineries, municipal water systems, electrical power grids. And it's throughout our entire infrastructure to keep our way of life going on a day-to-day basis. And very few of these systems are very well defended. There seems to be a lot of more drive towards wireless access, remote access to the systems, but not a lot of focus on securing that access to the systems. And I think we're seeing more and more of the hacker community, the hacktivists, and perhaps the more dedicated or organized hacker groups trying to gain access to these systems for a variety of purposes. There's been a couple of news stories recently about potentially they took down water pumps. Those turned out not to be true, but in other cases, there have been access to the SCADA control systems. It's interesting that we'll defend the access to uranium at a nuclear plant very heavily, so nobody can get within miles of the plant. But pretty much anybody with the right know-how can really kind of insinuate themselves into the plant and cause those reactor rods to do something if they really wanted to. Kind of scary stuff, and it's something that seems to be in a growth area. I know the FBI was just recently talking about increasing funding just for this purpose.
So there are a few things here. One is that, I'd taken a little bit of a look at SCADA a few years back, and I think there was an initial sort of surgence of interest in concern about SCADA-type systems, for example. SCADA being used for control of industrial systems, that sort of thing. And when I'd taken a look at it, it was interesting because it seemed like that whole strategy or that whole set of capabilities was defined around its own communications mechanism. And it reminded me a little bit about burglar alarms some time ago, where the transition, in fact, the way standards were defined for those systems had nothing to do with IP networks. And what they effectively did is just kind of plopped, for lack of a better way of describing it, plopped the data transport associated with the systems onto an IP network and did not really take into account the security requirements that come with it. That is, there was an initial assumption in the design that it was a fixed wire, a physical wire that was connecting the systems, and then all of a sudden that stuff's traversing an IP network. So I couldn't agree with you more. I think this is a situation where it's, not necessarily fully planned about how that kind of control capability mapped onto a network. And, I don't know if we had discussed this in previous cases. I know that we've discussed some of the things we've seen with the Stuxnet worm a while back. But there were a number of cases where we had identified as a part of our security analysis, industrial activities, mostly just what I would call mundane activities, relatively speaking, manufacturing of equipment or construction materials, that sort of thing. Or we notified those customers that they were, indicating that they were participating as a part of the command and control associated with Stuxnet. And that was to, help them be aware that they should protect themselves from that sort of an attack. But I think you're exactly right, Jim. This is something that's going forward. It's also encouraging to see that, FBI is getting an increase in funding. I think it was only about a 12% increase that they were talking about, around $19 million or something, but focused towards cybersecurity investigations. And
I guess it's to bring them more out of an 8x5 monitoring to a 24x7 monitoring scenario, which certainly will help a lot because most of the crimes are being committed outside of the 8x5 window. Something else I've been looking into recently, if you think about your car as a SCADA system that's all controlled by computer now in most modern cars, a lot of cars now are internet enabled. They're actually directly connected back to the internet. They're sending a lot of control and information back to the manufacturer through these central systems so they can see how the car's performing, when it needs maintenance, and so forth. But also there's other systems where it's connected into alarm systems where the police can do remote shutdowns and stuff. And if you think about that stuff is accessible on the internet. That's how it transports. So if you look at that as an extension of SCADA, it starts to get very personally involved to the average person out there now. So kind of scary.
One of the things I was going to say that troubles me about a lot of this stuff, particularly the SCADA stuff for industrial control systems, and including what you're talking about with, the upcoming stuff like cars, is I would venture to guess, although I'm probably not positive on this, that a lot of these systems don't have very good patch management control. They're probably running under, a version of Windows that was put on there 10 years ago. It's probably not been patched, and it's just cranking out pipes or whatever the heck it's doing, and can be exploited because it doesn't have a very good patch management process in place. And probably a vendor put it in there, and then, whoever's using it, it really isn't maintaining it or patching it properly.
Probably if ever.
Right.
It's a good possibility. I think it's, on one hand, it's kind of encouraging. We've talked about a few different sort of industries here. In automobiles, there does sort of seem to be at least a safety-oriented patch management activity. That is, I know that when I take my car into the dealer and if there's any service bulletin associated with that, they make sure that they do the patching. But, of course, if you're doing your own maintenance or having someone else do that for you, that type of patch management support may not exist, and I don't know how robust it is in that particular space. But as you said, I think I would tend to agree that there are a lot of industries that are focused on, so long as they're cranking out their materials, there's probably no problem as far as they're concerned.
So long as they're meeting what the consumer's requesting, they really aren't concerned about the security, is what my opinion seems to be. It's a little scary when you think you could be driving down the highway and some guy sitting in Romania could turn your car off. that's an attention getter.
Cars can park themselves now too, so that means there's throttle, brake, and steering also under control of the computer. So think
that is
about
correct.
That.
Yeah.
All right, very good, Jim. We're going to be looking forward to some more discussions on this kind of topic going forward.
Okay, one additional thing I wanted to bring up was that a lot of these operating systems, as you mentioned, were older operating systems, and so as newer versions have come out, they're not certified with the equipment like the older ones were. And so installing a patch is kind of problematic because they have to make sure that the operating system is certified with the equipment that it's controlling.
That's one of the balances that we as a network service provider have to deal with as well. That is, is it better to patch and do that quickly and get through the certification process, which may be a little bit shorter, or is it better to leave it unpatched and run the risk of maybe that becoming an exploit, but at the same time having confidence in the certification that you've done previously? And that certainly does need to get weighed in. I guess the important part is to make sure that it gets weighed into the decision. If it doesn't get weighed in at all, then you just simply go unpatched, right?
Right.
Yeah.
That's a very good point, Dave. So, good discussion here, and let's go ahead and move on to the spam activity report for the week. Any interesting developments here, John?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. So the spam analysis trends that we've been seeing the past week, this is for the past 7 days, and really there's not much of a new story to tell. There's a little bit of a hiccup that I can't really explain, and we'll talk about that in a second. But in general, we're seeing about the same amount of traffic we saw last week, about 1 million messages analyzed. It's a much lighter amount of attachments that we were either blocked out of the emails, which is the yellow section here, or attachments that made it through. So we see 134 that were blocked, 541 that actually made it through and were delivered. Last week, if you remember, we had a big run of spam related to Dromadon was the downloader. And I forget what actually Dromadon dumped on there. It might have been Zeus or a Z-Bot Trojan, but I can't remember exactly, to be honest. In any event, we are still seeing Dromadon, just not as much. We're not seeing as much of a run on it as we were before. So in any event, here this is the kind of breakdown that we have. It's pretty much the same as we saw last week relative to the amount of traffic. The executables, just switch up my executables are the ones that we'd probably want to take most of a look at, or the zip files as well. The other attachments tend to be, although not entirely, attempts to get you to fill out a form and send it to them with personal information like either your credit card or your Social Security number or other personal information. Those 419 scams, I think they're called.
John, in those counts, I think you measured about 1 million last week. We got about 1 million this week, if I remember correctly. I think the prior week it may have been more around 750,000 along those lines. Was that an off week, or do you have any assessment of that? And if we remember back, I think that may have been due to the fact that it was during the Thanksgiving kind of holidays. Now, I don't know why we would see less spam during that time. That doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. However, that's the only rationale I could come up with at the time. So I'm not sure about that, but that's the only thing I could think of.
So, John, there's a lot of PDFs in there. Are you seeing a lot of attempts to infect through PDF, or are they also form-based for the most part?
We don't do, currently I don't do a lot of analysis on the PDF because that's kind of tricky for me to pull it apart. I have done some spot checks on those. For the most part, those are just PDFs with no JavaScript or malicious stuff inside. So most of those are like that. Only very few actually are what I would call suspect because they have some JavaScript component inside the PDF. But it's very few. So out of these 4,892 PDFs here, maybe, I'm going to guess, maybe about 20 actually had any kind of JavaScript in them. So very few. When I actually look at these, again, those kinds of scams where they want you to fill out a form or they want you to read something and supply them with some information. They're trying to, coerce you into doing something or providing them some information of your own without trying to infect your machine.
And in fact, I think that was one of the general recommendations, is that it's relatively rare that you actually need JavaScript in a PDF, unless you're using it for forms, but most of the time it's used for documents. That's a sort of a telltale sign that you should be taking a closer look at it, that, if there is that type of capability to scan for that in the antivirus tools.
Right. And you can actually disable JavaScript via your Adobe Acrobat Reader. That is a setting. I'm not going to tell you how to steer towards where it is actually in there, but it's under your configuration settings on Adobe Acrobat Reader. That might break some legitimate ones that use JavaScript. However, if you want to be safe, it's a setting that you can look into disabling.
Recommendation there.
Cool. So in terms of the general spam, the things that are somewhat indeterminable as to what they are because they're probably just spam without any malicious component necessarily in them, same kind of topics we've seen before. Again, holiday types of themes are appearing, which we expect around this time of year. I'm trying to see if I see any more. Holiday special, save on toner cartridges. I think we saw that last week as well.
Yeah, I see a Groupon down near the bottom.
Yep, Groupon holiday deal, exactly. So a bunch of those. No real surprises here. It's pretty much the same kind of patterns we've seen previously. In terms of what has been blocked, the thing I found interesting about this is someone's missing from this list, and maybe you guys will notice who's missing. So Dromedon is in here again with the USPS delivery failure notification. We saw that last week. Smoller is in here as well with a lot of spams related to order numbers. I think last week we saw the order number theme as well from Smoller, as well as I think they were doing some Creative Suite license keys as a kind of coercing spam, and it had like a licensekey.exe in the attachment. And then we have some other ones like Trojan Generic. I didn't get a chance to look at what this really turned out to be. But again, they're using postal type of services that they're purporting to be. The attachment is actually a Trojan. MyTob, again, we've talked about before. This one is kind of specific to AT&T.net users for the most part. This is a campaign kind of against AT&T.net accounts to coerce them into thinking that their account has been suspended or their password's been changed by AT&T. They're purporting to be us, but it's not from us. And there's a Trojan inside there, so watch out for that one.
I wish my email could be sorted this way. It really makes it easier to go through and get rid of the spam.
Yeah. Acanta, we talked about before. We've seen this Laura would like to be your friend, and your friend invited you to Twitter messages before, or subject lines before. Thank you from Google I had not seen before, so that's a new trend in the Acanta subject themes. I didn't look at the exact email there related to it to see what they were saying in there, but that's a new subject for that particular one. And then there's a few other smaller ones here that we only got a few in, twos or ones of. Again, DHL, a lot of these package delivery services are a very common subject that they purport to be. Failed EFT, this is an electronic fund transfer, so this is some kind of indicating that you had a failed banking transaction. And I didn't take a look at this in detail, but it comes up as PAC Generic 307, which I have no idea what that is, but we only saw one of them. So NetSky, MyDoom, and Salady, I didn't take a look at these in detail, but we only got ones or twos up. They probably, in actuality, I like to look at some of these ones or two ones that we get because they're so low in volume that a lot of times a lot of the AV vendors don't pick up signatures for these. So when I run them through VirusTotal or some other, virus analysis engines, they usually don't come back with any signature, but indeed they are malware. It's just that they're so poorly detected and not really widely sent around that most AV vendors don't pick up on them.
I would expect to see more of the package delivery failure notices coming out for the next couple of days to a week because of everybody getting those last-minute orders in from the online vendors. So that's an easy way to trick people into clicking on something because they're in a panic over not getting their Christmas presents on time.
Yep. And we have seen that over the past few weeks as well. We're going to talk about a particular version of that in a minute here. So one of the things I wanted to point out that I kind of alluded to, if you've been watching the program the past few weeks, something's missing. Anybody know what's missing?
I don't see any FedEx targeted ones here.
Well, not only that, but there's no Trojan Z-bot or Zeus. There was no Zeus detections this past week, which kind of troubles me a little bit. I'm not sure what that means. And it could just be that they halted their campaign of spreading the spam for now. There are a bunch that got through, and we'll look at that. But it's not, from a volume perspective, it's not an inordinate amount. We're missing some. We're missing some Zeus activity. I'm not sure what to make of that.
And those are mostly financial guys, so they might be out for the rest of the year.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe they're on vacation.
Yeah.
So, in terms of the detected blocked malicious spam, this is just from the previous page, kind of a summary. No surprises here except for the absence of Trojan Z-bot, also known as Zeus. And then we have some of these lesser ones here. Didn't really account for much traffic, but for the most part, Dramadon and smaller are the big ones out there that get spammed most heavily, accounting for probably, 75% at least of the total spam volume that we see of attachments, malicious attachments. So the ones that actually got through, we'll notice that in terms of counts here, 171 Z-bot ones got through, and they were of the FedEx variety, as Brian mentioned. That could be that they changed their binary payload, and AV vendors aren't picking it up very well. But even last week, we saw probably, I want to say, 200-300 at least, ones that were blocked, in addition to at least a couple of hundred that made it through. So it seems like there's some reduction in the amount of Z-bot stuff that we saw this past week, and I don't really have a way to account for that necessarily, but just an observation. We see a couple other Z-bots, Dramadon smaller, lots of Dramadon smallers that made it through. No new surprises in terms of the subject lines, USPS delivery notification. Again, these are doubled up here because this is actually two different binaries, but had the same exact content, but different MD5 checksums. I need to clean that up a little bit. And then rounding out the ones that actually made it through, there were very few, like one, and I only sent once, but they're definitely malicious. I just haven't had a chance to analyze them. They also are not detected by anybody. So when you run these through VirusTotal, they don't have any detections. But I guarantee, especially like something like this, where the name of the attachment is servicehost.exe, and it's a subject line is Western Union approved payment, I guarantee you that's malware. It just needs some analysis done there. Anyway, moving along, and this goes back to what Jim was just talking about, saying that we've been seeing a lot of package delivery services targeted. Well, there's one in particular that we've been seeing a lot, and it's going on. I think we actually talked about it maybe a couple of weeks ago, and I wasn't connecting all the dots yet. But we finally have kind of connected the dots here. So recently, over the past 2 or 3 days, there's been a new campaign using a particular worm, and the worm is called Win32 Cridex. And we actually analyzed a sample of this before, but didn't really realize what we were analyzing. The subject line here is a little bit different than the ones from before, but this one is purporting to be an email from Amazon.com, and it'll say, the subject line will be your Amazon.com order of, and then it'll have a description of some kind of product item here, and this is probably too hard to see on your screen, but there's various subject lines. They'll say your Amazon.com order of whatever product has shipped, and then inside here will be an email, and there will be links. All these links point to the same exact URL, which is a malicious drive-by URL. So some things I wanted to point out about this in particular, if you happen to get one of these emails, because one of the things I should mention is Amazon.com does send legitimate emails with this exact same subject line. So be careful. And I know a lot of people around this time of year are going to be ordering from Amazon. But one thing, a couple of things to note. The from address is not from Amazon.com. They're not smart enough or whatever maybe I shouldn't tip them off. And this is not to say that they're not going to change their tactic tomorrow. However, for the most part, what we've been seeing is the from address is from somebody other than Amazon.com, probably somebody you don't even know. The to address oftentimes includes multiple people in here, and I kind of obfuscated them here so you can't tell who they were. But a lot of times in all the samples I've analyzed, they have multiple people in the to, which would be a little suspect. Why would anybody, why would Amazon send the same order confirmation to 6 or 7 different email addresses? So those are things to look out for. The thing that is most important about this one is there's no attachment in this email. This is a drive-by type of exploit, and we'll take a quick look. I don't want to spend too much.
Before you go on there, John, I think the other thing along the lines of tips of confirming that this is, even if they were to fix those things, the flaws that you had just described, floating over those URLs that are on there, generally these emails, if you're looking for a shipping confirmation or, track your package, that sort of thing, it should point to a reputable shipping company or to Amazon directly, in which case they oftentimes redirect. So floating over that, those URLs will indicate that they're going to some bogus domain. And they may be a shortened URL, which to my knowledge, I don't think Amazon is using shortened URLs.
I don't believe so either. That's a good point.
And a lot of what I've seen in the subject look like real products. I mean, it's not something necessarily made up, but it's a real product that, somebody could have ordered. And, a lot of times when you see that sort of thing, you say, hey, wait a minute, I didn't order this. And then you want to click on the order to find out, where your name appears to see, that you didn't really order it.
Find out when your free products are coming. Absolutely.
Yes.
And I'm sure that's their intention, is to make it seem like, hey, I didn't order this. Wait a second, let me take a look at this order. So I'm sure that's their intention, is to kind of coerce you into going there, knowing that you didn't order this type of thing, and it's going to, pique your curiosity.
Yep. And sometimes they have a price in there too, and they say, it's a couple $100 or something like that.
Right. And it does say that lower down on the email here. I just couldn't fit it all on the screen.
Yeah, it's another case where you should really be paranoid and give things a second look when it's a little odd or suspicious.
Right. So we saw over the past couple of days, this is just a quick sampling of the most recent ones that I could pull out, but we've seen at least about 100 or so various subject lines. The thing to note that I mentioned already is the sender is always not Amazon.com. The subject is always your Amazon.com order of, and then some description of some kind of product. And then the URLs inside, we've seen at least 75 to 100 different domains, and we're going to talk about those domains in a second here on the next slide, because that's a lot, and it's not one person registering, and what they're doing is they're going around and infecting them. So what's happening here? What's that, Brian?
These are legitimate websites that are being infected and then malware being posted. Is that?
That's exactly right. So it looks like, from what I've been able to determine here, is that most of these websites are legitimate ones. Of all the ones I checked out, they were. And most of them were using either Joomla or WordPress. And for the Joomla ones, it looks like they're using some exploit in the WD Banners module to drop a little bit of a payload in there. If it's a WordPress one, it seems like they use fgallery, which we have a couple at the bottom of the list here. And there's a couple of others that I haven't really been able to take a closer look at, where there's some templates or other things that look like they might be exploiting in order to drop a payload onto the machine. In any event, what we've been able to determine is there is a worm called Cridex. I don't really know how it works, whether the infected machines go and look for new websites to infect, or if that's happening in another out-of-band type of process or not. But the way the initial infection, if you were to click on one of those links in the email, you would go to one of those locations that I was just showing here. So this would be the type of URL that would be under that email link that we're looking at the email. When you actually go there, all it does is it returns a very small second-stage little URL in here, and if you look really closely, it goes to a location, which is it's basically just going to reload the page from a different location. And there's a handful of these as well. I didn't collect them all up. I didn't have time this morning to do that, but there's several of them that contain obfuscated JavaScript, which basically is ultimately loading what's called the black hole exploit kit. Now, the black hole exploit kit is a kit that's available on the Internet. It used to be a pay exploit kit. I forget, it was several $100s, I think, maybe up to $1,000 for this kit. What it does is it allows you to infect a website, or if you have access to a website, you can put this up on there, and it tries several different drive-by exploits, including JavaScript-based ones, Adobe Flash ones, Acrobat Reader ones. It'll do Java most recently, which we talked about in a couple of episodes previously, a particular piece of malware that tried to exploit some Java applets in order to drop a payload successfully. That was the black hole exploit kit. So that's generally what happens here is you would click on this, your browser would load this page, assuming you don't block JavaScript or any of these other types of things that this exploit kit is trying to do. It would drop a payload on your machine and infect you just by clicking on that link. So, all in a nutshell, don't click on those links in those emails. Be very careful. Ultimately, what gets downloaded to the machine is what's called Worm Win32 Cridex. We have a checksum. This is an actual sample that was from the one that I was analyzing today relative to this. And Microsoft, I think I have Microsoft's report here. Cridex is a piece of malware delivered via it's a piece of malware that may be delivered via spam malware, which I think they mean spammed email, and is spread via Skidlow or by variants of exploit.js Black Hole, which is an alias for the Black Hole exploit kit. And some notes to mention about it. It spreads via removable drives as well, utilizing the autorun.inf. So if you put a thumb drive in, it's going to put itself on there and move to somebody else's machine. It communicates via SSL to one of several different command and control servers. And its primary function is to steal and share financial login details from several online banking websites, which, if we've talked about before, it has a lot of similarity and sometimes is detected as SpyEye or Zeus ZBot, which are two other financial-based password stealers, which we've talked about at length on previous programs. Some AV vendors are detecting this as that. I'm not quite sure. I haven't really had a chance to dig into it. They look different to me on the surface, but they have very similar functionality. And for sure, Cridex is spreading in its own kind of unique way, which might be the reason that it's got its own kind of name. So it's kind of hard to tell what AV vendors, they all kind of do their own thing or come up with their own names, so sometimes it's kind of hard to tell. However, to me, it looks like its own kind of animal, separate from SpyEye and Zeus.
Maybe the Zeus guys have moved over to this one? Maybe that's why we're seeing less Zeus?
I don't think so, but I think it's different. I think it's a different code base, but I could be wrong.
It could be a different code base, but perhaps the same folks that are behind it.
That's true. And I think we did talk about somebody. There is the guy who did Zeus, or wrote it originally in SpyEye, there was some talk about him making a new variant and selling that privately instead of as public as the Zeus one was, but I don't remember the details of that conversation.
Interesting.
Okay, that's all I have.
All right, John, if you can, we'll go ahead and move on to the Internet Weather Report here. And there's just, a couple of handfuls worth of things that I'd like to share with you here today. We reported this last week, and true to our sort of predictions or what observations at the time, activity on port 23 certainly has climbed back up over the last week, and it's become sort of a significant amount of activity. So we're going to take a closer look at that. And as it turns out, similar to what we had seen back when we were reporting on this in the July to, I think, September timeframe, there is a relationship to activity on port 22. So for the most part, this, if it's consistent with what we've seen before, it would be password guessing attacks against Telnet and SSH. We'll take a look at the activity there. This is much more aggressive than what we had seen in the past. There's also some activity on port 6257. We'll take a look at that. I'm not terribly concerned about that from a security standpoint, but it does have characteristics that are a little bit shady in my opinion. So we'll take a quick look at it, get that one again. We have some activity that is showing up as an anomaly that appears to be sort of a growth of perhaps some gaming activity, so I'm not too concerned about this. We've classified it as yellow. There are a couple other things that I'd like to share with you here. One is activity on port 53. This is denial of service activity. We'll take a quick look at that. And we've been reporting on probing activity on SNMP, that's port 161 UDP, for several weeks now. We'll take a quick look at that because it is continuing. And this one is a little bit new to us in terms of discussions here, but one that is consistent with the types of activities we see, particularly perhaps related to spamming, where there's scanning activity on port 25, and that may in fact be looking for open relays that can be used for spamming purposes. So let's go ahead and take a look at port 23 activity. We're going to take a look at two separate views here. Last week I showed sort of a combined view. The first one is looking at the scan sources on port 23. That is the number of sources that are doing that scanning. As you can see here, we're seeing, lots of short but significant spikes in the number of sources that are doing that scanning. That's very much a telltale sign of botnet activity. We haven't been able to find the command and control. I think it's outside of visibility from our network here. Most of these sources, that is a reasonable proportion, more than half, are associated with activity from addresses in Korea. That's represented in the high points. But, in the nulls in between these spikes, most of the sources that we see are actually out of Taiwan. And there is some diversity associated with other scan sources on these ports. After all, they are ports that are sort of frequently targeted. Looking at sort of a little different perspective here, this is looking at the number of probes that are scanning on that port. On the previous picture, we were looking at basically thousands of sources that were scanning. On this page, we're looking at tens of millions of probes that are being conducted by those sources. So we see some pretty significant spikes here in the last week or so. This one looks like it was on December 10th. This spike was actually just yesterday on the 14th. And those are up around 60 to 70 million probes per hour that we're seeing, and you can see there's some aggressive activity here. Looking back in time, as you can see, there's a relatively flat profile of activity of much lower levels on the order of, maybe a million or so per hour that we typically see. So this activity is significantly higher than what we had seen even back when we were tracking on the order of, as high as about 15,000 sources that we're scanning. Now they've gotten much more aggressive. That is, many more probes from the individual sources of scanning in this case. And as I'd mentioned, this is related to port 22 activity. We'll take this is again going back and looking at the number of sources that are scanning on port 22. That's SSH. And again, the majority of sources in Korea. Now, the counts here are detected as somewhat smaller. I suspect that what may be happening here is the probes are going across, looking for IP addresses, checking on port 23, and then perhaps subsequently checking on port 22 to try to see if there are services available on those ports. So that's port 22 and port 23. We'll continue to watch that, and of course, you want to make sure that you're protecting anything that's exposed on the internet of that sort. I mentioned port 6257 UDP. This is a port that is associated with a file sharing, a point-to-point file sharing protocol. I'm showing 90 days of activity here, so you can see we've seen, upsurges of activity in the past. There was a significant null period for about 6 weeks here, and then in the last couple of weeks we've seen some significant increases in activity on that port. This could be entirely innocuous, as I've stated before, but it does sort of have some repeating characteristics associated with it, some things that I'm a little uncomfortable with. And it's very diverse in terms of who is participating in this activity, participants from Germany, U.S., Italy, and France, and that's consistent with what we reported last week. So it doesn't seem to be growing, so that is a comforting characteristic in some respects. Next one is port 28852 UDP. There isn't really an application associated with this port, or assigned to this port, but there are known gaming applications that have been associated with this port. And the characteristics of the activity are consistent with P2P activity, so I'm going to sort of say this is likely gaming activity. It does sort of have the profile in terms of the daily profile of perhaps gaming, where there's significant surge of activity in the evenings and significant null periods during the day where perhaps the players are in school or perhaps at work. And the next one I wanted to share with you is volumetrics increases on port 53 UDP. This is DNS, Domain Name Service. And what we're seeing predominantly here are some spikes associated with DNS amplification attacks. So it's not unusual for us to see DNS amplification attacks, but for those to manifest themselves as volumetric anomalies. And you can see that it is relatively unusual, or not as usual. You can see that we see spikes from time to time. And what we're looking at here, by the way, is a difference in the activity relative to what we expect to see. So this isn't absolute numbers, this is a relative measurement. And predominantly what we picked up in our alerting here is a spike that occurred. It looked like it was on the 14th, yesterday, around midday GMT, so this will be a morning work time. And when I went back to look at these, for the most part, the attacks that we've been seeing have been actually targeting a number of different addresses, but all of those addresses that were being targeted in this case are located in China. So I'm not sure what the motivation of those attacks might be, but they do appear to be DNS amplification attacks and targeted toward Chinese addresses. Next one, as I had said previously, we've reported on this for a little while now. You can see where we've seen some previous activity, some significantly, what I would describe as medium-high aggressive scanning activity on port 161 UDP. This is a simple network management protocol. And consistent with what we've seen before is that we're seeing effectively a single U.S.-based address that's conducting most of the probing activity here. But each time we've reported on this, it has been a different address, and true to what we've seen in the past. Again, it's a different address that's doing the probing. Appears to be coming from a hosting provider. And there has been a relative decrease in activity that is in the last week or so, and this will be about the marker for the last week. Less activity, but still shows up on the radar as an anomaly, and in particular there was some activity just earlier this morning that some reasonable probing activity, about 4 million probes per hour, that was taking place. And last on the list here that we'll cover is scanning activity on port 25 TCP. This is in terms of the number of probes that are taking place. Two sources in the United States are the source addresses are the majority of the probes are coming from those. Some of those appear to be successful connections. That is not a surprise because there are a reasonable number of mail servers out there. And in fact, they may be using DNS lookups to help point directly toward where the mail servers might be for particular organizations and probing those to see if they're answering their requests. So my suspicion here is that, there are two possibilities. One is they could be looking for an exploitable mail server. SendMail, for example, has had vulnerabilities, exploits in the past. But most likely what they're looking for is mail servers that are configured so that they can be used for a spamming relay. And you can see here that there have been what I would call medium-high aggressive activity on the order of about 25 million probes per hour that we're picking up on.
Yep, and just to point that if people are running email gateways, they want to make it so that only their customers can initiate email through there. Put filtering on so that not everybody from the internet can get into the relay and send out email.
Absolutely, and that's actually a necessity because what will end up happening is it'll quickly be identified as a spamming server otherwise, and there is a pretty aggressive activity on the internet these days to shut down spam sources.
Right.
You don't want to get shut down if you're trying to run a mail server. So to summarize all this, what we previously looked at here were the anomalies, that is changes that we've detected over the last week or so, the ones that showed up highest on the radar, so to speak. There's certainly a lot of other anomalies that are more short-lived, but those are the ones that sort of accumulated the most on our radar. These next two are looking at, in terms of probing activity, what ports are being probed the most, and the first one being port 445, and then second in line, port 1433. So Microsoft SQL database is still a very popular one. 23 TCP has shown up significantly more because of this aggressive scanning activity that we just talked about a little bit earlier, and we continue to see some other activity. One thing, since we talked about the web servers being exploited earlier as a part of these the analysis that John was talking about, we don't see too much probing activity. We see it. It certainly is present. There is probing activity looking for web servers, most likely for the for an opportunity to exploit web servers. But I suspect that for the most part, being web-based, most hackers that would be looking for a web server to exploit will go to Google and Google potential exploit targets. And that's a well-known thing, which may be something we'd like to talk about on the program sometime in the future. But like I said, we do see probing activity looking for web servers from time to time, but I suspect that most of the exploits are based on, sort of going directly to the web servers based on searches that are available through, I mentioned Google, but other search engines will be able to provide the same kind of capability.
Oftentimes you can find the specific vulnerable page on Google. You don't have to hit the web server itself.
Right. Yeah. So there are certain types of attacks that can be looked up. I think the term of Google dorks is associated with that sort of activity. And then last but not least, looking at the perspective of the sources that are doing that probing, again, port 445, because remnant configure infections, as well as the number of botnets that mimic those types of exploits, that is looking for weak file share passwords, also looking for exploitable unpatched machines that have file sharing exposed. I think in our collective opinion, you should never have this exposed to the internet, but certainly if it is, it needs to be very well protected. Number of sources probing on port 23 is showing high on the radar here, and then we talked about port 22, and we never want to forget that there are certainly other ones that are being probed as well. 3389 still being a very popular one, looking for weak passwords on remote desktop protocol sessions. So with that, I think that concludes our program for today. Any last comments or questions from the group here? All right. I want to thank you. Thanks, Jim, John, and Dave for joining us today. And again, a reminder, if you have questions, suggestions, or recommendations for the program, please contact us at cyberthreat@list.att.com. You can reach this program on the AT&T Tech channel. That's techchannel.att.com. Just look for the CyberThreat report in these shows. And you can also access it as an audio podcast from iTunes as well as on YouTube. Just search for the AT&T CyberThreat report. And on behalf of all of us here, we wish you a good week and keep your network safe.